Chris from DSX Machina, and I am here with the December update. I know when I'm posting this, it's going to be probably New Year's Eve by the time this goes up. So I am just catching it in the line. This is my third attempt in recording this video, so hopefully it'll go through. And I think it's important for me to show you guys what's going on with the channel, what's going on with the Amethyst Factions, which is, of course, the priority. It is a big priority despite a lot of other projects going on, including a board game that I'm working on with somebody, which I still can't talk about. But Factions is kind of my big project. It is still moving at a pretty good pace. It's moving slower than expected, but we were compensating by changing how we're developing the system. Now, originally I said we were going to release all 5 of these systems around the same time. Obviously that would be a logistics nightmare, so I decided instead that I was just going to release 5th edition Amethyst first, Amethyst Factions for 5th edition first, and then do the other editions. Well, as it turns out, that's not going to happen either because the artwork is taking such a long time to arrive. So I've come back to the original plan, which is brewing its own nightmare, but it's all on me to try to keep all these systems in my head. Basically, originally we were going to make the entire 5th edition layout, all the artwork, all the fluff, and then we were originally going to sit on that, produce the other ones, and release all the books simultaneously. But that was really kind of unwise because it would involve us sitting on perfectly good product for 4 or 5 months waiting for the other books to get done. So that's not going to happen. So we were going to release 5th edition on its own, and then a month later try to get one a month over the next 4 months as we try to get all these editions made. And it could be even sooner than that depending on the systems. But the issue is the artwork wasn't coming in on time. So I went back to my original formula, just slightly altered. So now when we get all the artwork for Chapter 2, and we're prioritizing chapter by chapter, we'll do Chapter 2 for 5th edition, 4th edition, Pathfinder 13th Age, and then when Chapter 3's artwork is done, we go on to the next one. So far we've gotten 5 chapters done. And as a result, we wanted to make sure, because originally we want to make sure these books were consistent. Unlike the core books, we look at Apotheosis or Renaissance or Quintessence, they do look and feel very different. The artwork's all the same, but they're applied slightly differently, and sometimes the sizes are a bit off, the backgrounds are a bit different, and there is some significant fluff differences between the books. Quintessence, being the largest book, is probably the most canonical version of Amethyst we've had so far. But it does do a disservice to those people who, say, pick up the Amethyst Compendium and don't see as much fluff. Compendium is still a gigantic book because it's so crunch heavy. Going into Factions, which is fluff heavy and crunch light, it would be way easier for us to create 5 identical books. There's going to be some differences, though, because 5th edition, 4th edition are more crunchy than Pathfinder, and Pathfinder is more crunchy than 13th Age and Savage World and Fate Core. As a result, despite the fact that they all have the same fluff, more or less, there's just no denying that there's going to be page count variations. 13th Age, like by the time we hit Chapter 5, in Chapter 5, we're nearly 20 pages less than the 5th edition book, despite having the exact same artwork with the exact same fluff entries and so forth. It's just 5th edition has just more rules than 13th Age, where talking about a character's race has rules that are about this big, and you go to 13th Age and it's this big, and that just adds up after a while. But I tried my best not to cut content out, which is definitely going to be difficult when you get to stuff like foundation spells, which don't really have a mechanical place in 13th Age. So that's the real challenge. So I'm going to show you guys an example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to showcase a chapter in 4 different rule systems. Now, like I said, I'm doing 13th Age Pathfinder, 5th edition, 4th edition, so forth. I'm not doing Savage Rule Fate Core. That's Christopher Stilson. The games will still look the same, but I can't show you those because it's dependent on him delivering the data files for those. Okay? Okay, so this is looking at now Chapter 1. Now, this is more of a test and example. We're looking at the Pathfinder version. And right off the bat, we'll see as we go through the various chapters that this one's going to be identical, right? So every one of these is going to look the same, right? I skipped over to 13th Age. Once again, identical. Now with 5th edition, we're adding rules for ladders, which are carried over from Ultramodern. So we have that little section right here, but beyond that, it's identical. Okay, so now we're looking at the Factions Chapter 2, which is Light, which is the some new rules for the various races in Amethyst. So we're looking at the 4th edition version now. We have Shaperans with their new alternate Shaperan race, the Adu Bushmen, and we can see them over in the left, which is the cover image. And as you can see here, that we have the Shaperan Life Path and another Shaperan Life Path with the Sorakan and the Wild Grit, and a whole bunch of new Shaperan feats. We also see that the Shaperans and the Sorakan has alternative powers as well. The Damascans have the new a new alternate race, the Penamoon, Penamoon. I wrote it, can't even pronounce it. And they're just a slight variation of their. Gimfen have another variation, Pygmy Gimfen, which are more gnomish, and they have a life path, Piece of Pixie. They have their own feats. They have, and you have Ladinians. Don't have a lot of input in this book, unfortunately. Then we have the Neros, and they have their life path, Iron Core, and they have a new Paragon path. This is a Paragon path specifically for the Neros called the Kugata. And so they have their 3 classes. That's a completely normal 4th edition Paragon path. The Pegas have a new life path, a couple new life paths, the Fanatic and the Monger. And with the Tenenbree, we have an alternate race for them called the Shaolin or Shaylin. And then we have a couple new life paths for them because we're going to be exploring them in a huge detail, the Fanatic National and the Athranas. And that is also, it's a new wizard tradition, so it's another Paragon path, and a whole bunch of Tenenbree feats. The Thailand, we have some stuff with Thailand. There's a new illustration for a Thailand male that's brand new. And we have their life path and a whole bunch of feats. With humans, we're adding a alternate race for humans called the Quinox Winterfolk. And of course, the new race, the Ani. We have their racial power there. And we have some information on their history, their backgrounds. And they have a couple backgrounds and a whole bunch of feats. Now, that seems pretty straightforward. Now, if we skip over and we see the 5th edition. Now, 5th edition rules have implementation rules for sub-races. So instead of being a full alternate race, the Adu Bushmen are a sub-race, so they don't have nearly as much information on them. But their background has the life path table, which is something unique. Now, I was thinking of putting these into the other editions, but since the core books didn't have them, it would be really inconsistent. So these tables for life path are something that are wholly exclusive to 5th edition. They have their ladder, and now a ladder are a series of connected feats, so that's something also unique to the 5th edition version. And once again, the Damascans also same thing, sub-race, so they don't have much detail. They have a bunch of feats on themselves. The Gimfen have a whole bunch of history, then they have their Pygmy sub-race, and they have their ladder, Piece of Pixie. Ladinians, of course, now they have their ladder called Sura, so this is somewhat missing in the other version. The Neros, there's the Iron Core. But now, instead of being a Paragon path, it is a fighter archetype called the Neros Kugata. So it's slightly different, although thematically still very similar. Illustrations are once again basically in the same position. There's the life path information for the Pegas, but we notice that the Monger is not a background, it is now a ladder, so it's a bunch of connected feats. Tenenbree have their own, once again, their sub-race, the Shaylin, the Tenenbree background, and then the Wizard Tradition, which is once again similar to the Wizard Tradition in 5th edition. Thailand, of course, they have their ladder called Dampiri. And the humans, once again, now we have a human sub-race Winterfolk, and the Ani are, once again, basically the same thing as before. Now, if we go into the 13th Age, once again, we don't, now the Shaperan and Adu Bushmen are a background, not a sub-race, because 13th Age doesn't really do races as detailed. So now you pick a background for the Adu Bushmen instead of being an alternate race. So the rules are slightly different, but the fluff is still there. Same thing with their background Wild Grit. So now they are 2 of the same thing. They're basically identical backgrounds. You get to choose between the 2 of those. Same thing with the Damascans. Now it's now a background for Gimfen. It is an alternate race. So with Gimfen, unlike the Adu Bushmen and the Penamoon Damascans, the Pygmy Gimfen are an alternate race. And that was because their bodies are very physically different than the Shaperans or the Damascans, where it's more regional and environmental than full-on magical. Where the Pygmy are very, very different creatures. They're almost a completely different race. But their background Piece of Pixie is right there. And of course now the feats are listed underneath them, but 13th Age discourages a lot of additional feats, so where you saw 5 or 6 feats, you'll see only 3, right? Because we want to whittle down, we don't want to add too much crunch in the 13th Age edition. So now we see the Tenebrae background and the Vanaka background. So instead of the Shaylin being a subrace, now they're a background again, and the Vanaka is also a background. And the Tenebrae Athranus is no longer a Paragon path. I didn't want to make it a legendary path, which is a new rule we included with 13th Age. So now these are 3 backgrounds. So before, where you can actually pick all 3 of them, technically you could pick a Shaylin subrace, pick the life path of Vanaka National, and then pick the Wizard Tradition. With 13th Age, because it's so streamlined, you don't have that. You can technically, because of the number of background points that you're given, you can technically pick all of these. As you know, the 13th Age rule, so it is entirely possible to have points dedicated to all 3 of these backgrounds. So it does still work. And then they have their background, the Fugue, which is another background you can get into. And humans, once again, we decided to add it as a sub-race for the Quinox Winterfolk because they are physically different. And the Ani are a new race with their own abilities. So after that, we go into the Pathfinder version. And the Pathfinder version, we have the alternate race. And we have the Chaperon feats. And now we have, of course, traits. And traits were introduced in Pathfinder. So now the alternate race Adu Bushman, and then they have the trait for the Sarwakan, and then Damascans, same thing. It's an alternate race for the Penamoon Damascans, and the Gimfen is an alternate race. So we've changed a few things once again depending on the specific rule. So you can see that all of the fluff is still here, but it's being translated in different forms. So once again, we look at the Kugata, and the Kugata is now a full-on prestige class. So it has probably the most detail of all of them because we have all of these class features because the prestige class is so much more complicated than a Paragon path in the other games. So when we look at him, he has a lot more rules behind him. And the same thing goes with the Pagus Monger. He also has a lot more rules around him. Tenebrae, alternate race for the Shaylin Tenebrae, and then Tenebrae trait Vanaka National. And once again, the prestige class is now Athranus, so the Athranus is now a prestige class where it wasn't in the other games. So it gives you an idea how the rules do change depending, but the fluff doesn't. You can see the artwork is basically in the same place, and we see here, but you can also see, if you notice in the page count, they are significantly different because just these rules are just larger in some other games. So Pathfinder 4th edition, 5th edition are very close to each other. 13th Age, Savage World, and Fate Core will be very, very different. They'll be definitely shorter in length. And so the Ani now, we have a trait for the Kasaka. They have a whole bunch of feats. Right? So once again, in 13th Age, all of these feats were relegated to just a small little section, like about maybe that big, because the feats don't have names. So that gives you an example of what to expect. So finally, we'll take a look here at Factions Chapter 3, Darkness, which is, I think, a really beefy, heavy-handed. There's a lot of concepts in this one, a lot of fluff, and there's also some crunch as well. And we'll see that as we get further in the chapter. I'm going to go over this one really quickly, but you can, once again, if you just keep track of the page count, you'll see it radically change between the different editions. The first, obviously, is the Shimizaza. The Shimizaza are a new race, so there'll be a new race in every single version of the game. And the same thing with their big rules on the traits, because we're looking at the Pathfinder version here. And Arcane Schools. Arcane Schools are, of course, really easy to do in Pathfinder 5th edition. Not so much in 13th Age, so we'll see how we try to play with the rules there. Same thing with the base Neverborn. So you see what a Pathfinder monster will look like. There's the entry for the base Neverborn, and then that's a monster, right? And you'll see exactly what I mean by page count. So we go 6-7 pages, once again, Pathfinder version Chapter 3, and we'll go into 13th Age. Once again, we'll see an identical chapter here, but as we move into the next chapter, there's the race. Once again, smaller entries for the feats, so a book does take up less space. They have a background, Dark Seed, there it is, so that doesn't change. So here, of course, we've changed the schools into these legends. Now, if you guys have Apotheosis, we introduced legends, which are basically our version of the Paragon Paths prestige classes. These take up levels 8, 9, and 10. So you can see levels 8, 9, and 10. So this is definitely a real different departure from what you would expect. So it was our way of trying to get this fluff and these rules into Apotheosis without breaking their philosophy. But of course, we go to Neverborn, and we see the Neverborn is right there. So it's a much different looking creature entry because this matches what you'll see in 13th Age. Now we go into 4th edition, you'll see a lot more crunch. So their racial entry trait is right there. We'll see their backgrounds right there. We'll see their feats, their disciples, which is another path. And then we have the Arcane Paragon path. So now these Paragon paths, which we know very well, and you have Skull of Intromancy, and then so these are all the powers for the Intromancy, for Necromancy, and Nilomancy. Now, Necromancy is a fully established school in 5th edition in Pathfinder, but it doesn't actually exist in the core rulebook for 4th edition, so I had to then create one. Now, I'm sure, and I know this for a fact, that there is Necromancy rules in other 4th edition books. Like I said, I never refer to those. I always use the core books as your source material. And so when we go into the Neverborn, of course, once again, uses 4th edition rules philosophy with their monster. And we're going to take a look at the 5th edition version, and we can see here, once again, Shimzaza have their racial information over here, and their backgrounds now will have a full life path. The Disciple Sakar is, once again, another life path. And the Arcane Schools are, of course, much similar to what we see in 5th edition. You won't see an entry for Necromancy because that is already established in 5th edition, so we don't need to include that. And the Neverborn, once again, matches the philosophy for 5th edition monster design. So then there you go. Now, of course, we're looking here and we see the page count of 75, which is a lot higher than the 13th Age version. And that gives you an idea of where we're at. Like I said, we are actually past this already. We've gotten Chapter 4 Saints, although there's still one illustration for Saints to get finished. And the 5th edition versions are being adapted right now. Once we get past Chapter 5, that's Chapter 6, 7, 8, we'll breeze on by because that's just fluff. And then we'll eventually hit a bit of a slow point when we deal with monsters, because designing monsters for 5th edition is done. For 4th edition, won't be too difficult. 13th Age is easy. And Pathfinder will be a real grind because I hate designing monsters for Pathfinder. Well, so there you go. You get an idea of how these games are looking. You can see, obviously, the artwork is quite up to our level of quality. And one piece of trivia, we actually have 2 illustrations potentially for the Neverborn. We have that one, and we have this one. No, this one's actually an older illustration. If you have the old D20 book, you'll find this recognizable, but Nick decided to do a new one, which is right there, which you'll see permeated through a lot of illustrations because it's just amazing, if not disturbing. But we'll see that going forward. All right, guys, see you later.